Hey everyone, it is Charlie, your commie preacher. I'm here once again with a new Church of the Revolution video, and we teach one thing, that Jesus was a communist. I'm going to get this out of the way, so follow me on YouTube, click subscribe, click the alert, the bell to get all notified anytime I make a video. Support me on Patreon if you would, and all that information will be in the description of the video about how to follow me. And you can also follow me on Facebook and other places. Today is going to be a departure from all of the videos I've done here, except for that one little singing video. But even that, hopefully most of you haven't seen that video because I set it to private. Video of me singing, which I will do later. I will eventually do some music on here. But today, I have a very different agenda in mind, and you'll see it up here. Healing the brokenhearted is communist praxis. And for this, I'm going to drop some of the persona that I've been using to preach that Jesus was a communist. I'm not backing off of that for a minute. I'm just going to deliver something very different. So let's take off the hat. And I know you can see more green. You can see my hair. It's almost all gone. It's like here. And I got a ponytail. Again, we're dropping the pretenses, sort of. We're shifting the persona. So here's the next piece. Just watch. I'm wearing a clerical collar, which I have not worn in one of these videos. Some of you know that I am an actual minister in real life, and I think I've said that in my videos. I am a minister of a church here in Illinois. I won't name the church because what I do here with Church of the Revolution is my own project. It is not related to what the work I do with the other church. So today we're going to talk about healing the brokenhearted as communist praxis. And the first scripture we're going to read is from Luke, which is a quote from Isaiah. And this is Luke 4:18. Jesus came to Nazareth, and the book of the prophet Isaiah was handed to him in the synagogue. He unrolled the scroll and found the passage where it was written, "The spirit of our goddess, our mother, our creator, is upon us, is upon me. Because the Most High has anointed me to bring good news to those who are poor. Goddess has sent me, Mother has sent me to proclaim liberty to those held captive, recovery of sight to those who have been blinded, and release to those in prison." I want to be clear that we don't advocate ableism. We understand this verse here, recovery of sight to those who are blinded, as talking about not literal blindness, but rather harm that has been done to human beings to render them unable to perceive truth. Yes, it's a metaphor. Yes, it's ableist. And I'm acknowledging that right here, that I use this. But I want to be clear that the purpose of this video here is about healing the brokenhearted. Now, in some versions of your Bible, the phrase, "I have come to heal the brokenhearted," is in here, because it's in the original, it's in the passage in Isaiah where this is quoted. I'm not going to quote that Isaiah passage because I'm going to go to a different scripture but to expound on the ministry of Jesus as a ministry of healing the brokenhearted and how that's a communist practice. We're going to go to the Psalms, to Psalm 34. And here we're going to go verse 18. "The eyes of our mother goddess are upon those who do justice, and our goddess's ears are open to their cry. The face of our mother is turned against the oppressors, to cut off their memory from the earth. The just cry out, and goddess hears, mother hears, and saves them from all their troubles. Goddess and Mother is closest to the brokenhearted and rescues those whose spirits are crushed. Many are the afflictions of the righteous, but Goddess, Mother, delivers them from all their troubles. Mother protects their very bones, and not one of them will be broken. Calamity will strike down the vicious animals, and the haters of justice have been condemned, for Mother, Goddess, ransoms the lives of the faithless, and none who take refuge in her love will see punishment. You want to know why I'm referring to God as female? You can see an earlier video that I did. I really feel that it is important to deconstruct our understanding of God as a female or as a male and replace it with the image of Goddess and Mother and female. So I'm going to be consistent about that. It is true, Jesus never called God Mother. He called God Abba, Abba, or Abba, Abba, in Aramaic. And in that culture, in that time, that was his choice. And even though I believe Jesus was a communist, he wasn't a feminist. He was closer to feminism than probably anybody living in his time, but even that, I wouldn't die for that. Jesus is a human being. Jesus is imperfect. The Gospels we have are imperfect records of who and what Jesus said. So I'm going to follow and do a video later on that I call Tear Up Your Bible. And we'll get into how you should approach the Bible if you are a radical, if you are a communist, if you are a follower of Jesus who wants to eliminate oppression and suffering in this world. But here we're going to begin with healing the brokenhearted as communist praxis. Right now, the forces that could transform our world are disorganized. They are not united. They are divided. And this has been true throughout much of human history, let alone Western imperialist history. We live now in the heart of the global empire, the global ruling class and the systems of domination that they impose upon all of us. And if you want to understand more about that, you can watch my video on Against the Death Systems, where I talk about the ruling class is actual living human beings and the institutions that they use to keep themselves in power. And then they impose through those institutions systems of domination and oppression. And this is where we get to healing the brokenhearted. The division within our world of the progressive revolutionary forces in our world is not because they're bad people. It's not because they're sinners. It's not because they're stupid, dumb, any of those things. It's because they're brokenhearted. Jesus, when he went around the Nazarene Galilean area, he was based in Capernaum on one side of the Lake of Galilee. And so this is where he went around preaching for approximately 3 years. We don't really know. He may have only preached for 1 year. He went around all of the area of Galilee gathering people. And this was after he became a part of the John the Baptist movement. And then John the Baptist is beheaded, and Jesus starts his own movement. And Jesus went around preaching that the divine regime, the regime of the goddess, the regime of our mother, the regime that would take away all of our suffering and oppression was on its way. It was here. It was present among us, and we could become the divine regime. We could become the communism of love, heaven on earth. We could become that. And that is why Jesus came to heal. There's a story where Jesus is in a city, and there is a blind man. Or is it a crippled man? I'm forgetting. He healed blind people and he healed people who are crippled. And again, we are not preaching ableism here. We understand these stories as existential narratives, as symbolism. And I understand that it is ableist to use crippledness and blindness as a metaphor for spiritual problems. But what we need to understand is that these are signs of trauma. Trauma. The oppressed are really hurting us. So that when the Bible talks about Jesus healing a handicapped man, he is not talking about physically fixing the bones of a handicapped man. It's rather he is healing him from the trauma that led to his injury, led to their injury, as well as restoring their connection to the revolutionary movement, the movement of our mother goddess, our goddess in heaven, who is working throughout history to unite the just so that they can prevail in the earth. And this is the moment that we're in. We are in a moment where the just, the revolutionaries, the injured, the harmed, the traumatized can begin to unite because we have the tools to do this. But they're not united. They're not coordinated. They are not brought into a revolutionary fullness. And that's what the Church of the Revolution is preaching, is that revolutionary fullness and how each of us can begin to access its power now. One of the things that inspired this video is I've been spending some time on TikTok. I've created a few videos. You're welcome to go look at them. But if you're a YouTube follower, you've seen much more than I've ever put on TikTok. I put much fewer videos on TikTok. It's a very different platform. You get a minute. What can you do in a minute? I've had to work. I've learned a little bit about what you can say in a minute and what you can't say. I need a drink. Feel free to have your own beverage. So on, I will call it post-Christian, ex-Christian, ex-evangelical, deconstructive TikTok, I heard a story, one young woman in her 20s, telling her story about being placed somewhat illegally with a foster family after having been in two really horrible families, her birth family, which was a lot of poverty and disorder, her second foster family that took her out of that terrible condition. One of her foster parents hated her and shaved her head. She had beautiful red hair. They shaved her head. And then she finally ended up in a third family or a fourth family. I lost track. I think she may have been to 4 different families. But at any rate, the family that she ends up now, she calls her parents. Not her birth parents and not her, foster parents. These she calls her parents, even though they never legally adopted her. That this woman who probably didn't know she was a lesbian, because being a lesbian, when the family she was adopted into, she says they're part of the Duggar cult. So if you don't know what the Duggar cult is, it's the Duggar family on Lifetime Network or whatever that has 15 kids or whatever, because they're a quiverful family that just has baby after baby, and birth control is a sin, and not having lots of babies is a sin. She ended up in a family that was a part of that ideology, but I'm guessing that because the parents were possibly infertile, they adopted or took in a foster child that wasn't even assigned to them by the state, and, began raising her. And, of course, they raised her with a very dogmatic ideology. She refers to this as the ATI ideology, which is the something training institute that was founded by a dogmatic fundamentalist known as Bill Gothard, who has since lost his position as the leadership of this Duggar cult. He calls it the Duggar cult only because the Duggars are the most famous people in the Bill Gothard cult, or the Bill Gothard. I don't know if I want to call them a cult. She does, and that's true. And her, she was raised in a religion that was what we call a high demand, toxic religion. you can call that a cult. And there's problems with calling it a cult, but you can call it a cult. And I'm not going to tell this woman she can't call what was done to her as being treated like a cult. It totally was. Bill Gothard has been exposed as having molested and even raped women and harassed sexually young women. And yet here he's preaching this doctrine of a divine hierarchy. God above, the men, the women, and the children are all in this. And there should be absolute obedience to this hierarchy. And there's just millions of rules. You shouldn't watch TV. You shouldn't see movies. You shouldn't listen to anything but Christian hymns. This is a toxic, authoritarian style of parenting that is advocated by the Bill Gothard Institute Biblical Life Practices. I don't have all that up. I will put some of that in the comments. But it was hearing this woman's story of being raised in this family that was less worse than her previous homes. She'd been in one really horrible home, got sent to another that was not a whole lot better, but somewhat better, but still horrible. And then she ends up in this family, and she stays there for at least, she said, I don't remember how old she was when she had maybe 9 or 10. She ended up in this family that she ended up living into her adulthood, moving away when she was 21, going to college, and then beginning the process of deconverting, realized that she was a lesbian because she had been, when you're raised in a home like that, your sexual desires are so dominated by the heterosexist discourse that even if you are naturally attracted to women, you're taught to not, either to believe it's sinful, and so you because everything that's sinful, you should have willpower to control it, so you repress it. So it's totally true that this woman grew up in a heterosexist, homophobic family as a lesbian and didn't realize she actually was a lesbian until she was in her 20s because of the programming, the cult-like programming that occurred in her family of origin. It's kind of hard to call it her family of origin because, like I said, it was her third or fourth home, and they weren't even legally her guardians. Her legal guardians sent her off to live with this, the legal guardian who shaved her beautiful red hair, sent them to live with this Duggar cult family. If you want to find this, you can look for Liz Harris, Lizharris on TikTok, and you can hear all this story. I think she also has a number of other places where she has put her story, but it was listening to this story that got me thinking about this healing the brokenhearted as communist praxis. Jesus went around healing people, but I don't believe, and there's reason to believe that he wasn't like magically knitting together broken bones or magically giving new eyeballs to people whose eyes had been completely destroyed somehow, that he was, because a lot of it also talks about expelling demons, that Jesus expelled demons from people's bodies. And one of the most interesting demons in the book of Mark, the Gospel of Mark, is this demon known as Legion. Jesus ends up in a town, a demon who haunts the tombs, who hangs around the tombs, runs out of the tombs, comes up to Jesus and says, "Master, please do not harm me." This is the demon speaking, not the human where the demon was inhabiting. And Jesus says, "What is your name?" And he says, "My name is Legion." There have been a lot of speculation about this story. But what's interesting about it from a communist praxis point of view is that legion is the term for a group of Roman soldiers. And so this story about the demon inhabiting a man on the edge of a town, living in the crypts and in the tombs, away from the majority of the townsfolk, but he's still sort of terrorizing, that's all symbolism for the Roman legion. It's all symbolism for the oppression of the Galilean area by the Romans. And of course, the Romans were also occupying Jerusalem and other parts, Samaria. All these Jewish homelands were dominated by the Romans. And the demon named Legion was living in a man in a small town. It doesn't take a lot of deep thinking to say that the Legion, the demon afflicting the man, was actually the Roman Legion, the Roman authorities, and that they were seen as the demonic oppressors of the Jewish people. Most of us today don't believe we can be inhabited by a demon. There are some. I should say, belief in demons is higher than you might expect. Probably half of the United States believes in actual demons coming and possessing your mind. I think it's just as plausible that people will have mental illnesses and that those mental illnesses affect their behavior. And that was what, because the word in the Greek is not demon, is actually unclean spirit. Spirit is your breath. The book of Genesis says that the mother, when she breathed life into the human that she had created from the soil, she breathed life into him, and he became a living person, a living being. Spirit is breath. Spirit is your breath. And so in a sense, an unclean spirit is the spirit within you, and unclean means ritually unclean, means religiously unclean, means that you have violated in some way the purity laws. Now, I think it's perfectly fine to replace the phrase unclean spirit with mental illness. Unclean, illness, spirit, mental illness. So that this being, this human that ran out of the tombs, confronted Jesus, says, please don't destroy us, because he had a mental illness. And Jesus says, what is the name? What is your name within you? He says, my name is Legion. I am dominated by the Roman oppressor. And Jesus says, and then of course it sends this Legion into the pigs. Again, we can get into the pigs. The pigs are a sign of impurity. A Jewish village with a bunch of pigs is not generally considered a good thing. But why would they have pigs? If Jewish people don't eat pigs, why would they have pigs? Probably because they were selling them to the Roman Legion. The Roman Legion needed those pigs for food. The story makes a lot of sense when you realize the oppressiveness of Rome. But let's talk about today, the 21st century. Let's get back to today. What does healing the brokenhearted as a communist practice mean today? Jesus went around the Galilee healing, and then he gathered a movement, and he took that movement to the city of Jerusalem, confronted the authorities, the collaborators, and the Roman government itself, and the Roman government said, let's kill him. Let's execute him as king of the Jews. So he was executed for being a messianic pretender because he brought an entire movement out of the Galilean area, picking up people along the way, brought them into the city of Jerusalem on Palm Sunday. Today, I told the story of this young woman who was pushed from one bad, broken family to another and stayed with the least broken family she ran into. And eventually she realized that she was a lesbian and is in therapy and is telling her story about how she was harmed. That's healing. That's healing. That's her brokenhearted got healed by that therapist who said, you realize you were raised in a cult? And she said, you're right, I was. And I had the same experience. My father was an authoritarian Pentecostal preacher. Now, we weren't into everything that the Duggar cult type people, the Bill Gothard movement was into. My dad was conservative, but not that conservative. He called himself a moderate. But even though he was a moderate, he was an abuser. He abused my mother, he abused me, he abused my siblings. He abused us all in kind of different ways, because you do the worst damage to your firstborn. Your secondborn is, you realize some of the mistakes you made with your firstborn. You usually, if you're smart, you don't repeat them. And then my thirdborn, my sister, was actually a girl, and you just treat girls differently. And my father doted on her endlessly. But then when my mother finally had had enough and left the family, my father began to emotionally harm my sister. And we've talked about all of this. My brother doesn't talk to me at all anymore because of my communism, because I don't accept the Bible as perfect and all that. So I'm going to tell you a story of how I became healed, how my broken heart was healed. And this is going to be a difficult story, and I'm going to put a trigger warning on the video because I don't want you to, stop it right here. If you don't want to hear a child abuse story, stop the video right here. Talk to your therapist before you decide to listen to this. If you don't have a therapist, email me, call me. I will listen to your story. You don't have to hear mine. But there's a reason I tell this story, because every time I tell this story, people realize how difficult their lives have been and how we're all suffering. And yes, I believe in communism. I call it communism, but I'm not here in this moment to convince you to become a communist. I'm in this moment to say there is healing for the brokenhearted. So here we go. This is the story. I was probably in the 3rd grade. I might have been in the 2nd grade. I really can't remember exactly. We were living in a town of about 3,000 plus people. My dad was the minister of the Pentecostal church in town, or at least the only Pentecostal church I knew. There might have been another one in there, but he was the pastor of this Pentecostal church. I was a new kid. We moved there when I was in kindergarten, so most of the kids didn't know me. And so I'm walking home, and I think it was the 3rd grade, but it might have been 2nd. I was walking home from this public school that was about a block and a half from where we lived, maybe not even a whole block and a half. And this kid's following me, and he's the class bully. He's taunted and teased me before, but he's never followed me home. So he's following me home, and he's calling me dirty words. He's calling me stupid. He's calling me an SOB and a fucker. And he's hitting me and punching me. And I'm just ignoring it. I'm not talking to him because, didn't Jesus say turn the other cheek? So I'm just like turning all 50 cheeks. The kid is following home and tormenting me. I'm a new kid in town. I still feel new, even though I've lived there at least 2 years at this point. He's tormenting me. Finally, we get really close to my place, and I run up the driveway, and this kid, yeah, you better run, you little fucker. I put my hand on the door of my house, on the doorknob, and I say, yeah, well, you're a fucker too. Open the door, and there's Dad. He had bolted off the couch when he heard me curse, pulled out his belt, and yanked me inside the door. And he began to give me the worst beating of my life. I thought I was going to die. I never felt safe again in his presence after this. He had beaten me before, but this was above and beyond. There were little welt marks on my legs, and I'd never had that happen before. I'm resting after the beating, I think on my parents' bed, because that's where he had done it. He pulled me into his bedroom and proceeded to wail the tar out of me with his belt. I'd probably fallen asleep because my mother showed up. My mother put her hand on me and said, "Hi, Charlie. I know your dad can lose his temper and really hurt you, and I'm sorry he does that, but let me give you some advice that'll help. When he's hitting you, don't resist. Don't respond. Don't fight. Don't cry." Now, I was a fan of Star Trek. I was especially a fan of Mr. Spock and his ability to control his emotions. And I said, I can be Mr. Spock. I can pretend I'm not feeling the beatings. And I did that for the rest of my life, living with my father. I moved out when I was 16, I think. Well, he moved out. That's a long story. That's for another day. When I became a teenager, I started to experience severe depression. I didn't connect it to my childhood trauma, but pretty obvious to me that the depression was a result of the trauma. I began seeing a therapist in the mid-80s. And one day, I apologize, my eyes are watering, and I know it looks like I'm crying, but I'm really not crying. I have a medication that makes my eyes water sometimes. I was seeing this therapist, and one day, I've been seeing them for years. I've been seeing two therapists, one for a few years, and then I went to a different therapist. And this different therapist, I said I wanted to have an inner healing prayer session. And so, and she said, she said, yes, let's do that, and I will invite, or you can invite someone to be with you that you really trust. And I invited the man who was then my best friend. His name was Jeff. He was a minister. He had a healing ministry. He actually prayed for the sick, particularly around emotional needs, but also, trying to heal physical disease. So I'm in this room with my therapist and Jeff, and telling him the story that I just told you about what my father did. And I told my mother, and I get to the part where my mother tells me, don't fight, don't resist, just accept it, and it'll be over sooner. And Jeff said, Charlie, what did you say to your dad before he beat you that time? Okay, I may cry for real. I said, Daddy, please don't beat me. Please don't spank me. I'll be good. I'll never say that word again. Please don't spank me. When I told Jeff and my therapist, her name is Bev, she passed this last year. Bev was a wonderful, sweet person. When I told Jeff and Bev those words, my heart shattered. I just broke out in tears that I hadn't cried since I was in the 3rd grade. A part of my voice that had been silenced, which is a true part of me, was made free on that day. There is a part of you that is suffering and traumatized by the death systems. It can be around your sexuality. It can be around poverty. It can be around how you are parented. Parents are often our primary abusers. Not all parents, but many of us have had abusive parents. And if you're watching this video, there's a good chance you were harmed by a parent. We are harmed by the political exclusion, by the way in which the majority of us have almost no say in the political decisions of our society, despite the fact that we're supposedly a democracy. We are harmed by our gender identity. If you're a man, you're taught to not cry. Literally. You're taught to take it like a man, and that tears a hole in your soul. If you're a woman, you're taught that you're not as valuable as men, that you don't have the same freedom as men, that you should look forward to becoming a mother and not anything else. And so many other negative messages about being a woman, that men have a right to your body, that someday you have to give yourself 100% to a man and let him use your body any way he wants to. And above all, we are destroying our relationship to the earth. Because if we have the freedom to abuse and destroy the bodies of children through child abuse, the bodies of black folks through white supremacy and slavery and Jim Crow and the new Jim Crow and police brutality, if we have if our society, the death systems under which we are ruled, have the ability to dominate each and every one of our lives, so that either we're a part of the ruling class or we're not, and there is no in between. There are people who go in and out, but most people, once they're in, they're in. The ruling class causes so much human suffering that the revolution has to begin with healing the broken hearts of the masses, the broken hearts of you and me, because only through our being healed that we can continue what has already begun in our time, which is the unifying of the oppressed masses of the planet Earth in the name of their own liberation, their own revolution, the communism of love that we need on this earth. I told you this was going to be a different kind of message from me. There is a prayer that most of you have heard. It's called the Lord's Prayer. I'm going to pray it to our mother, our universal mother. That amazing cosmic energy that brought each one of us into being, that made our existence possible. May we reverence the beauty and justice and compassion of our mother. May her communism come on earth, revealing universal principles of justice and truth to every living being. And may every hungry person have enough to eat. May we each have mercy and forgiveness for those who get entangled in the systems of death. May we bring healing to them, and may we forgive them and forgive ourselves. There is a wounded, broken-hearted child within your heart. There are things you haven't allowed yourself to feel, words you haven't allowed yourself to say for years. Letting those neglected parts of yourself speak and cry and scream at the trauma and the abuse is the beginning of your liberation. And when you have that liberation, join with others in movements of liberation and revolution. Thank you for listening to this video today. I want everyone in the sound of my voice to experience some kind of healing today, some kind of empowerment to have a better day and to move towards a better world. Jesus and his mother, Goddess, loves you.